You are standing on a ridge of frozen grass, and the wind cuts through every layer of hide you own as though it isn't there. The sky sits low and gray. In every direction, ice stretches past the horizon, burying rivers, forests, coastlines you'll never see again. You have no fur worth mentioning, no claws, no thick hide. Almost every animal sharing this frozen world with you was built for the cold. You were not, and yet you are still here, not for one brutal winter, but for thousands, 20,000 years straight. How did a soft, slow, practically unarmed primate outlast an ice age that froze half the planet solid? That question has occupied anthropologists for more than a century, and the real answer has surprisingly little to do with strength. The first clue isn't a weapon. It's a needle. In 2016, researchers digging in Siberia's Denisova Cave uncovered a needle carved from bird bone, complete with a deliberately drilled eye for thread, dated to roughly 50,000 years old. Maxim Kozlikin, who led the excavation for the Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography in Novosibirsk, confirmed it as the oldest needle of its kind ever found, predating the next oldest example by around 10,000 years. Similar tools, some even older, have turned up at Sibudu Cave in South Africa. What these finds reveal isn't just sewing, it's tailoring. Draping an animal hide over your shoulders traps some warmth. Stitching that hide into a fitted, layered, wind-sealed garment is a different survival strategy entirely, one that let Ice Age humans push into landscapes no bare-skinned primate should have been able to tolerate. But clothing alone doesn't explain a shelter built from the bones of the largest land animal on the continent. Around 18,000 years ago, at the height of the last glacial maximum, groups of people near the modern village of Mezhyrich in central Ukraine built circular dwellings entirely out of mammoth remains, skulls stacked as a foundation, tusks and long bones forming the walls, hides likely stretched over the top as insulation. For decades, archaeologists assumed these were permanent villages. A 2025 dating study led by Wei Chu at Leiden University, using the bones of small animals trapped inside the structure rather than the mammoth bones themselves, told a stranger story. One of the dwellings was occupied intensely, but only briefly, deployed during the single harshest, most volatile stretch of the entire Ice Age, then walked away from. These weren't mammoth-bone cities. They were emergency architecture, built for a crisis window, and abandoned the moment conditions allowed people to move on. So if it wasn't shelter alone, and it wasn't clothing alone, what actually kept people alive when the temperature dropped and the food disappeared? The answer might be sitting in a grave in western Russia, at a site called Sungir, dated to roughly 34,000 years ago. Archaeologists uncovered an adult man buried beneath nearly 3,000 mammoth ivory beads, each one shaped and polished by hand. Nearby, in a second grave, two children, likely cousins based on later genetic testing, were buried head-to-head with more than 10,000 beads and a set of ivory spears between them. Natasha Reynolds, an archaeologist at the University of Bordeaux, has called Sungir the earliest clear evidence in Europe of complex funeral behavior. And here's the strange part. Children that young could not have earned that kind of wealth through their own achievements. Someone gave it to them. That single detail points to something more valuable than any tool: a social structure. Kinship networks, shared resources, and communal obligation meant that an injured hunter, a widowed mother, or an orphaned child didn't simply vanish from the group. Ice Age survival wasn't a solo achievement. It was a network effect. There's an even stranger twist buried in your own cells. Modern humans and Neanderthals overlapped in Europe and Asia for thousands of years, and interbreeding between the two groups happened more than once. Neanderthals eventually died out. Modern humans didn't. But research led by Janet Kelso at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology found that the genetic exchange left lasting fingerprints. Variants in immune-related genes, inherited from Neanderthals and Denisovans, that altered how the human body detects and fights off infection. Those variants appear to have offered a real survival advantage as modern humans pushed into cold, unfamiliar territory full of unfamiliar pathogens. Put plainly, the species that lost the Ice Age handed part of its genetic toolkit to the species that won it. Survival wasn't a clean split between us and them. Some of what carried modern humans through the cold came from a species that no longer exists. And even with clothing, shelter, community, and borrowed immunity, humanity still nearly didn't make it through. Between roughly 26,000 and 19,000 years ago, ice sheets swallowed most of northern Europe, and human populations didn't spread out evenly to survive it. They collapsed inward, retreating into a handful of livable pockets: southern France, Italy, the Balkans, and above all, the Iberian Peninsula. In 2023, geneticist Vanessa Villalbamoco and colleagues at the Institute of Evolutionary Biology in Barcelona analyzed the DNA of a 23,000-year-old individual from Mezhyrich Cave in southern Spain and found genetic continuity stretching back tens of thousands of years, direct evidence that Iberia functioned as a climate stronghold while much of the rest of the continent emptied out. Vast stretches of Europe were simply abandoned. If those handful of refuges had failed, an enormous share of the ancestry alive today might never have existed at all. So which of these actually saved the species? The needle, the bones, the beads, the borrowed genes, or the handful of valleys that didn't freeze over? None of them, on their own, look like the reason a species conquers an ice age. But together, they describe something that no single strong body ever could: a way of surviving that didn't rely on any one person, or any one winter, holding the line alone. So picture that ridge again. The wind still cutting through every layer you own. The ice still stretching to every horizon. You were never going to outlast this world through muscle, or fur, or claws you didn't have. What got you through wasn't what your body could withstand alone. It was everything, and everyone, you built around it.